Hello, my front-end friends. Thank you for coming to join me. Hopefully everything's working. Oh, I have a small problem. I have an echo in my ear, and I know why. There's always something wrong. Let's see if I can... That should fix that problem. Yeah, thanks for coming to join me today. I'm really excited for this. Sorry I'm a little bit late. I'm multi-streaming, and I was hoping that the service I was going to use, it asked me for a title and description and all of that. And I thought through the Twitch stream, it would automatically set that because it was asking me for it, but apparently it doesn't. So that's fun. It also does a combined chat, but it's not getting the YouTube chat. So that's kind of useless. So we're just going to keep both chats open, and I'll do my best to pay attention to both of them. So we're going to be doing that. I'll wait a few more minutes to get into the details. Let me see. And also on Twitch, it was completely the wrong title, which is fun. I'm just trying to figure out why I don't see a pop-out chat option on Twitch, and I can't find it, and it's probably right in front of me, but I'm going too fast, maybe? Cool. I'm sure there's... Oh, was it a pop-out chat? There was a way to do it, but I can just do this instead. I have another solution. That's fine. I want to keep that one open. I have 3 chat windows open, which should be a good way to keep track of stuff. But there we go. I have both chats visible to me now. I'll just do my best to keep an eye on them. Hopefully, I plan to do monthly to bi-monthly streams. I've already planned some other ones out. So we'll see how that goes. I see Twitch link. I'll put the... Where it is. I'll put people on YouTube asking for the Twitch link, so I just put that in the chat if you'd rather watch it there. Asaya asking how many screens I have. I just have one really big screen. So I have stuff all over the place just on that one. But yeah, thanks for coming to join me. I'm looking forward to this. It's going to be a bit different from my other live streams in that it... yeah, a bit more structured, maybe a little bit less, more of like an actual lesson in a way. And I'm not 100% sure how it's going to go because I always get distracted by the chat. But I'll probably do some lessony stuff, then jump into the chat, see how things are going, and then jumping back in. So yeah, it should be fun. We're obviously going to be focusing on responsive stuff. The beginning of it is going to be very simple things that people just get wrong, and we're going to sort of go from that and dive into, I don't know, different topics. So just like the very basics of it at the beginning, how to make sure that you're not running into the silly problems. Talk a bit about units a little bit. I don't really want to get into typography though, because it is another very big topic on its own. We'll look at different sort of mindsets into when you're setting widths and other things like that. We'll be talking about viewport units and why they're not all they're cracked up to be. We'll be talking about grid and Flexbox with intrinsic layouts. And then very close to the end, we'll talk about media queries and container queries as well. And so, yeah, sort of cover the gamut of it as much as possible. I did put a link in the description to the code pens. It's one link. It's a collection. There's 5 code pens that I'm going to be using as we go through different things. So, yeah. And so USAID asking if I can make their website responsive for the session. Not for this one. It can be fun to do stuff like that, but it's a little bit hard. And sorry, getting distracted by other things that I should close before I start live streaming. How long will the live stream be? I'm aiming for 2 hours. It'll probably end up being longer than that because they always end up going over and I get distracted and talk about other stuff or start rambling, but there will be a replay of it available when it's done. So no problems there. And I'm actually sort of going to use this as a bit, it's a dry run to recreate my Conquering Responsive Layouts course. There'd be a little bit more stuff in there. Awesome. Roland, hi. Nice to see you here. I think Amit's here. Mark is here. Brent, of course. A lot of first-time chats over on Twitch, but it is the first time I have Twitch going in a long time, so that doesn't surprise me. Triumph, do you think you should learn TypeScript or learn JavaScript? I'm working on a project right now with TypeScript, and I regret using it, but it depends on what you want to do. TypeScript is super popular, so that is part of it. But in big teams, it's useful. But the Badger Lady we met at CSS Day, awesome. I'm glad that we had the chance to meet each other. It was so fun being at CSS Day. Really a great experience to actually get to meet a whole bunch of people. Roland was there too. Yeah, it was so cool to meet so many people. It was fun to actually see people face to face instead of you guys just looking at me. This is Amit obviously was there as well. All right. Yeah, I think we're gonna dive into things and get started. And it's really weird having two different chats going on at once. I was really hoping that combined chat thing I was using would actually work, but oh well. Jason, I was a little shaky. I was so nervous at the beginning. The first 5 minutes were I was freaking out a bit, but it got better as it went on. Oh, another of Alpha. Okay, we'll do this before. I have to find it though, and then I'll share my screen once I get it. Priya's asking if I'll review one of Alvaro's projects. I just came across this morning. It's this is Alvaro's creation, which I almost abandoned all plans for this live stream. It was CSS Weekly shared this, which is Zoran. Except of course, there we go. Let's see if I can get it. I'll put a link to this in both chats, and I'll share my screen. I think. Oh, you know what? I don't think we're going to see a screen right away. Failure. It would be this one. It's a new CSS framework you can use to create Batman. And Alvaro created this, and yeah, I almost abandoned the idea for the live stream to explore this instead because it's hilarious. I think everybody can agree. So yeah, you have different like things for facial expressions and stuff, and so div class Batman, you get Batman. You can add on the different classes. You can change his skin colors. There's Robin. So we almost went into creating Batman stuff. Maybe we can try and make Batman responsive at the end. And the comic panels and everything you'd need, and some other information, adding text and everything. It's really cool. So yeah, oh, and look at that. We have a special chat thing. I didn't know this, but it's because I've only recently added memberships to my YouTube channel, and Mark just came in, who is one of my members. Thank you very much, Mark, for joining up on my memberships, and for hopping in here. You're the first member who's dove into the live chat, so welcome. Yeah, so that's what we could have been doing, but instead we're going to be doing some much less fun responsive layouts. So again, this link should be in, I'll put it in the chat on Twitch because I don't think it's anywhere. Oh, I'm going to have to, that's going to be annoying. Hopefully I don't have to chat too much in Twitch because I'm losing my live chat every time there's YouTube. Okay. Once again, this is recorded, yes. Oh, Alejandro is here as well. So we have a few different members in the chat. Thank you, guys. for the support and for being a member. It's awesome. Just for those who don't know, if you do want to either join on Patreon or as a member, very similar between both of them, and the whole idea is just to help support the channel to get more stuff. It's because of my patrons and now members that I've been able to upgrade a lot of my equipment, why I have an editor and some other stuff. Yeah. Oh, thank you so much, Mark. That's so generous of you. I appreciate that. Look at that. Now we got a bunch of members in here. I don't even know how. I think there's a way I can gift some too, and I don't even know how to do it. Something I should look into for the next time. Okay, let's get started in the first lesson that we're going to be doing. If you've been creating websites for a while, it might start a little bit slow for you, but we're going to wrap up into some more fun examples as we go through in this. And the first thing I want to look at is just the basics of the problems people run into, especially early on when they're beginners, when it comes to creating layouts. And the first thing people do often is they come in and they set a width on something because they need it to be a certain size. When I was a teacher in the classroom, the amount of times people would just have their browser window at whatever size and just hard code in values to get it exactly where they wanted it to, and then suddenly do that and get some overflow, right? Was very, very common. It happened all the time. And it's one of those early things that we do. And so just using fixed widths for the basis of a layout is a problem. And one of the solutions that people, again, beginners often do is when they come in, then they actually just come in with like a ton of media queries to try and solve it. Oh no, my commenting in CSS is such a nightmare. Let's do that. There we go. And then, right, so you have different media queries. So here we're small, then it gets bigger, then it gets bigger. You even see this type of thing in common frameworks sometimes, where the container sort of grows at different sizes as the viewport's increasing. In a way, it makes life a little bit easier because like, this is my static area. I know exactly how big it is, and it's going to change at a different screen size, but then I can just have a very specific layout for that size, and then another one for the next size. The problem is you end up with tons of media queries, and you have tons of code, and it just becomes a complete mess. So in general, we don't want to use, media queries, we're going to talk about them when you do actually want to use them, because there are times when they do come in handy. But you don't want to use them early on. They're sort of a last resort more and more with how modern CSS is going. So the first thing, obviously, is instead of setting a width, you might do a max width. That's like the simple win. Let's just make it a bit smaller. So if we do a max width of 700 pixels, like magic, it works. But then if we get smaller, it continues to shrink down, which is really great, right? So that's a nice, just easy win. And generally speaking, for things that hold other content, setting up a max width on things is probably the best way to go. I see some people saying my audio is a bit low. It looks okay on my level. So if it is low, just let me know. I'll bring my mic a bit closer to me, though. I'm trying not to look at the chat too much as I'm going through each individual lesson, but I am keeping an eye on it. So yeah, we sort of fix that problem. We have something that holds it. We still have the squishy inside parts of things, which is great. So a lot of the time, if you want a width on something, you want to use a max width instead. Nice and simple. The same problem comes in if we have content, right, for heights. But heights are different. I have the lorem ipsum ready to go over here. So in here, if I add a bunch of text, we can get rid of our comment. If you have a height, like I said on this one, of 250 pixels, which I said is for visualization purposes only, we run into problems because the content can overflow. And once again, something I see people doing is setting and just like magic numbering in a height to try and get it to work properly and be decent. But then again, it breaks. And then if this happens, then you're media querying and changing it, and it's all a little bit of a nightmare. So instead of using heights, in the case of a height, it's the opposite. And you don't want a height, you usually want to set a min height, right? So now if I have less content, let's just remove a whole bunch of this content. I don't have word wrap on, so I probably could have done that. Let's just say lorem 50 instead. So if we have less content, then it won't get smaller than the 450, but if ever it squishes down and it needs to grow, it's able to grow. So This is like a really simple bit of advice, but it's something that I like to talk about and remind people of. And it's also like, do you even need that height on there? Probably not, but right, it works fine. You can add some padding, do some other stuff to get the size you actually need instead. And the reason I like to start with that when we're talking about it, even for people who have done layouts for a really long time, is there's a really important part that also comes up with when we're creating these, which is just I'm using a max width on the width and I'm using a min height for the height. And that really comes into working with the browser and the way that the browser wants to work on its own. So if we don't have a width or a height declared anywhere, the element is just tries to be basically as wide as it can possibly get and as short as it can possibly get. And it's when, as this shrinks in size, it grows in height because it's keeping the same area because it needs to accommodate the content that's in there. So the width times the height equals something, and it's always more or less the same. Might not always match up just depending on how the content's wrapping, but it's basically needs to maintain the same area. And we want to embrace that and work with that as much as possible because this is, right, if I turn off, the thing I like to do is turn off all of my CSS, my comments, just delete it all, I guess, instead of commenting it out. But I have a responsive site, right? It's us who write, whenever you have code, you're writing, say that again. Whenever you have a problem with responsiveness, you're the person who's caused it. And it sucks to hear that, but browsers and the content and everything in there is responsive before you've done anything else. And it's you who's broken it somehow along the way. Some layouts are very easy to run into issues. Other ones, it's a little bit harder to figure out what's actually causing it. There are some exceptions. If you have images and stuff, we do have to push them in the right direction a little bit, but just because those can overflow. But other than that, it's us who are causing the problems. And just on a basic example like this, sticking with, I don't need to declare a width, but if I do declare a width, I'm going to make it a max width. And if I'm setting up a height, I'm going to do it as a min height if I really, really need to have that. Cool. I'm going to look at the chat a little bit now. For anybody, I see more questions coming in about if this will be available later. It will be, the replay of it will be up on YouTube as soon as YouTube's done processing it. I don't know how long it takes for it to turn live streams into like public things, but yeah, it'll be up on YouTube. All right. So yeah, that's sort of like the main thing there. There's also a really important thing here, which is a difference between width auto and width 100%. Usually, even when I'm talking about things, I often say that the default is width 100%, because if I do that, nothing actually is going to change here. It's matching the width of the parent, which is the viewport in this case. Or I could come on my child and I could say width 100%. And in this case, nothing right now is going to change. Nothing's changing because it's 100% of the content area it has, or of the parent. There is a difference between width 100% and width auto, though. It doesn't come up very often, but I do like to bring it up because I see times when people declare width 100% just because they know it needs to be as big as the parent. But that's already the default behavior that's happening. So you don't need to declare width 100% because you can say it basically already is there, because the auto is doing that for us. So don't declare it unless for some reason it's too small. Maybe you did something else, you have a media query, you need something that's going to make it bigger. I don't know what it is, but find something that, if you do need to make an adjustment, okay, but don't write a line of code unless you feel like you really need to have it. And the reason I bring that up is because on this child, if we add some padding of, say, we'll do 3 rem on there, and we add that width 100% back in there. And we also, I forgot one line of code. This is where, we have the border box on there. Oh no, it's not. I was doing padding. It's because I have the border box in. If I had some margin on this for whatever reason, it can potentially, one second, let's add a width here. I'm going to screw up this example, aren't I? I didn't prep this one ahead of time. Oh, it's not causing overflow. Yay. Margin left of 3 rem. And I know what it is. Width. I'm just going to turn that off for a second. And padding left 3 rem. This is, oh, I have my auto down here. This is why you have to be careful with your declarations, everybody. Let's undo that then. We're resetting the stage. Okay. So yeah, I can leave that there. Width 100%. The cascade getting in my own way there with the second declaration winning. So width 100%, and then I add some padding of 3 rem, and I add some margin on there for some reason of 2 rem. And then when I do that, it's actually overflowing out the side of the parent. Let's make the parent smaller now, just so you can see it. So you can see it's actually sticking there. If we make these, we make the margin value bigger, it will stick out more. It's not the padding causing the issue right now, it's the margin. If you don't do your box sizing border box, the padding would also add to this, but it's causing it to overflow out the parent because it's matching the width of the parent. So the content area, it's getting 100%, and then it just happens to be too big, so it's sticking off the side. If I never change this or redeclared it, we had the spoiler before when I made this mistake, but if I never changed this or I hadn't redeclared it and that was auto, I wouldn't run into that problem because the browser's smart and it can figure that out for me. So just don't declare stuff that you don't need, and especially for width 100%. You're usually using block level elements, or you've done a display grid or flex on something, so they're flex items and stuff. You probably don't have to worry. Flex stuff can be a little bit different. Sometimes you flex things can shrink down, so that's where it's like, okay, I need to make a change here because it's not doing what I want it to. That's when you actually declare something to change what's happening. Don't write CSS that you don't need to do something for because everything's working. That also comes to people who like doing body and width 100 VW. This doesn't change anything right now on my page, but let's add like a bunch of paragraphs in here. And all of a sudden, I actually have a little bit of overflow down here at the bottom. And that's happening because I'm on Windows. And with Windows, you have not a floating scroll bar, but you have a scroll bar that's here. And the width 100 VW doesn't take that into account. So the width includes the space underneath the scroll bar, and that leads to this. And people love declaring that. You don't need it. Your body's already the size you need it to be. Maybe you need a height on there. That's always possible, like a min height, because you need to center something, whatever, that's fine. Width 100 VW is completely useless and potentially breaks things. So just be careful with that. And just be careful with viewport units in general. But we'll talk more about that a little bit later. Somebody asking if we're going to get into container queries. We will be getting into them, yes. All right. So the other thing here that you can do, and it goes a little bit with that, is setting the width here. Like sometimes you do just throw a percentage on there to like shrink it down because you want it to be like 60% as big or something. If you're following a lot of older tutorials, you might see things where a lot of layouts are created with percentages, because back in the day when we had to do float-based layouts, you had to use percentages because you'd set your size as like 33%, and then you'd have the different elements floating next to each other, and you just had to make them small enough that they would all fit. And so there's a lot of really old, I guess it is really old at this point. There's a lot of very old tutorials and material out there that looks at setting percentages to help create layouts. And then, of course, the people who use that for a really long time, as they got more into modern stuff, they kept using the percentages a lot for widths. It does come into play a little bit when you start using Flexbox, especially. But just be really careful. Like I find these days, you don't need these as much as possible, or as much as we used to. Again, it depends, but just setting a width in percentage. I used to do it on my containers a lot too, and I just don't do it anymore. So yeah, definitely is an option. The other reason that I caution against percentages is just because percentages are weird in that it'll work for the width, but it won't work for the height, right? So here, let's just make, it's not the best example, but if I said here, oh yeah, this will work actually. If I say this is a width of 50%, it's going to be 50% of the space that it had available to it. It's 50% of the parent's content size, right? So we're not counting the padding that's on there. Then if I say height is, we want it to overflow. I want it to be 200%, and it doesn't change. So this is already annoying that it works on widths, but it doesn't work on heights. And that's because you need a defined height for percentage to work there, because it doesn't know what it's 200% of. the width it can calculate, because it can figure that out. The reason that this doesn't work on the height is because the height of the parent is based on the height of the child right now, right? If the child needs more room, the parent is growing and shrinking. So if I said this is 200% of the parent and it got bigger, well, then the parent would get bigger to accommodate that. And then that would mean the child would get bigger, and then you end up in an infinite loop. So that's why you have to have a defined height on the direct parent of an element if you want to use percentages as a height on the child. This is not the case if you're using grid, right? Because grid and Flexbox changes the game a little bit on that. We're just talking about block level stuff right now. So here, if I said height is 500 or 500 pixels, I'm putting in a fixed height, and then the height of that blue box can now be 200% of that, or double that size, because it knows exactly how big this is. One thing that people run into is they try setting a min height here, and then it breaks it. It's because we don't have a defined height once again. We have a minimum height, but we don't have that min height, so it doesn't work there either, because it doesn't know, again, the height of the child is going to influence the height of the parent. So it runs into one of those feedback loops again, or potential feedback loops right there. I see Daniel asking where the best practices for using viewport width. I don't use it. It's my best practice if it's to set the size of something. Pixel Chaos saying that they fell into percentage habit and it's been hard to unlearn. Yeah, definitely. And what about percentages within a container that's got a defined max at all times? Everything I'm talking about now, there's exceptions to it. There's going to be times where you need it. For example, is it this one? I do. Okay, so here's another one that we'll take a look at. And one of the exceptions might be for small things. I'm going to set a width and a height here. I wouldn't really do it this way, but like if you have a profile image, you have icons, you have small things, setting defined sizes on those is perfectly fine, because you know that's how big it's going to be. And those smaller things, they're not going to cause layout shifts or issues. There are times you might need, you have a defined height on something because you need it to be, and then you have a percentage on the child. It's going to happen. But if it's not if you try and avoid those things at the beginning, it makes it a lot easier. Like, okay, I need to do this here, and I can explain why I'm doing it here, and it's going to work. So then that might be the right way to do it. How do you usually handle, for example, the height of the page when you have a nav bar? Do you do a min height of 100 VH and then calc to be... It depends. I mean, if no, usually not. There's a few different ways to do that. I think using grid is actually the easiest way to do something like that. So let's make a pen.new, which, if you don't know, pen.new makes a new code pen. Awesome little trick there. So let's just say we have a header and we have our main. I'm not going to put any content in them. And you could even have other stuff here. We'll look at the other stuff in a second, actually. So let's just say the header has a padding of 2 rem and a background of pink. And then my main has padding of 2 rem and a background of light blue. Right? This stuff, I know there's some people who don't like putting this stuff on the body, so you could just have a main wrapper around it or whatever, but just whatever's defining like your page. Display grid, and then grid template, min height of 100 VH. Do we need that? Yeah, we'll put that there for now. So it grows. We also want the margin 0 on there. And then we could just say that we have a grid template columns of auto and then 1 FR. And whoops, this should be rows, not columns. And then I have my navbar space that's just going to fit the size of the navbar, and I have this area that's filling up the rest of the space there. If I needed more content, this is sort of becoming its min size. Well, it will automatically. So I think because of how we have this set up. So if I just said this is like, sorry, Yeah, paragraph times 150 again, and then just some lorem to give us an absurd amount of content. It's just going to work the way it would have anyway, so that's awesome. If the only time this becomes problematic is if you have your main that doesn't have a lot of content, lorem 10, and then here you have a footer. The footer is going to shrink technically the space that we had, I think. There we go. It sort of like squeezes in, but that's probably what you wanted anyway. So for me, this type of thing works well. If I just want, yeah, I think that works. But there's always different use cases. You might even just need like a div, and then that wraps the area that you need it to wrap. So then this becomes that grid, and then the rest of the content can come after that div. That could work as well. Little sidetrack, but yeah, a very common layout question I get, so I think it's worth answering. And for something like that, you could use DVH instead, or even SVH. It depends on the use case and then everything else. Jonathan, I'm not going to talk too much about responsive text in this one, just because if we have time at the end, maybe I will. But we'll see if we have time at the end. But it's text is its own thing. You just need to make sure your font sizes are small enough. I see someone mentioning that they use Flex for the layout that I just did. 100% that would work as well. The reason I prefer Grid for most stuff like that is because everything's just stacking, and Grid by default stacks. So I don't have to change the Flex direction or anything, so it's easier. Elias asking if I'm going to do more front-end mentor projects over time. I try and do one every 3 months or so. Well, I wasn't planning to talk about forums, but I might do a little side thing on that a bit later on. I'll put a note, and if we have time, I'll put a note in my notes. Here I'll say typography and forms, because both of those cause people headaches. Twitch chat is currently having a debate on what units to use for sizes. I use rems for most stuff. I decided for this one I wanted to be a bit more beginner friendly, so I went with pixels for most of my demos. But you could use rems or pixels. It's not really going to change very much. In general, there's arguments that can be made for one or the other. A little bit. It mostly comes down to if you think, or what happens when the user changes their browser font sizes, how you want the site to react. All right. So yeah, this one, actually, we can stick with this one as our next example. Let me just take a look at my notes. Oh, okay, yeah. What I wanted to talk about with this one, perfect. Yeah. Okay, next up, yeah. Another thing that I want to mention is that I see it a lot where people have, like, here I'm creating a card, right? And it looks ugly at big sizes. Let's just say my parent, let's just add a margin here for now of like 3 rem, 2 rem. So I have the card that's here. And the problem is, like, when you get it from a designer, you're working on something, it's a design sprint, right? And you have this card, you just have it at one size, or you see it's in 3 columns. There could be different things that are done. And you start making it, but you're on a big wide screen. And so it should never look like this. You can tell it shouldn't look like that. So what happens is people come in and they put a width on there, except you just listened to me. So you didn't, you're like, oh, Kevin said don't put widths. So I put a max width instead. If you need to, this can potentially come up. It's something I have done for elements. But most of the time, I would say that we want to avoid setting widths on components if possible. Max widths can sometimes be needed because it's going to get thrown into a spot where it just has to be a block level element and it has to do its own thing. And if you didn't have one, and then it could look really ugly. And something like this could happen. So there are times where you might need to, but again, only do it if you're like, okay, I need it because, and you can answer the because question. Being able to answer that question is really important on why you're actually setting a size on something. Because most of the time, it's, here, and it's the classic thing where the parent here, instead of, well, keep the margin there, but I could just say this has a max width of 500 pixels if I needed to. It's not the best example, but it gives me the same result where it's being held by the parent. So the parent is the thing that's creating the layout, and then the card is living in that. And I really strongly believe, as much as possible, in having elements that are creating layouts and then elements that are content. And content can what's the word I'm looking for? Content can impact your layout 100%. So you can never have this like detachment from the two of them. But being able to say, okay, I've set up my layout and now I'm placing content inside of that layout, to me is one of those like fundamental things that makes things a lot easier. Because if your component is affecting the layout in different ways, even if it's margins that are on there and it's creating extra space that you really don't want to have on the individual element, it just makes layout stuff a lot harder, because then you have the layout pieces with things inside that are causing more layout. And it becomes hard to wrangle, to be able to fix when you run into problems. So did I do it here? Yeah, we'll use this as our example here. So here I have like 3 divs set up there. So the first thing is, like, right now we have, like, right, it's way too big, or it gets too big at large sizes. So often I've changed how I do this, but we're going to keep it beginner friendly for now. We can talk about my new method of doing it after. I like putting a wrapper around everything though, right? That's sort of the classic way of working. I used to call my wrappers containers. I've since switched to calling them wrapper, which is just one of the 2 naming conventions that we have for them. And I just did it because we have container queries now, and I didn't want a container that wasn't related to a container query, because I just feel like that could lead to some confusion. So I can take my wrapper and I can just say this has a max width on it, like we've been saying all along, 700 pixels, maybe some padding inline of 2 rem or something like that. So padding inline is just your left and your right padding. So it will never get wider than that. We'll do a margin inline too. Margin inline, it's showing up in white in CodePen just because for some reason those 2 properties, the syntax highlighting in CodePen, doesn't work, even though they're pretty well supported at this point. So that's the idea there, is I'm not worried about setting sizes on any of the content in here, my H1, my paragraphs, things like that. I'm just trying to get the layout to work as a whole. And I've done that. And I have a course called Conquering Responsive Layouts. And one of the mistakes I see people do is, I have one of the early ones has like a title, it has the paragraph here, and then a button or something like that. And what people have this tendency to want to do is either to put like, they have like a H1 wrapper, and then they want to put a width on that one, right? And then you could also just be setting the width on the H1, but then they're like, oh, Kevin said you shouldn't set the width on the H1. So they put a wrapper there, and then they do their, paragraph wrapper, and then they wrap some paragraphs in the paragraph wrapper. And they're doing that because they're looking at my screenshot of the example that they want to follow, and they're trying to make sure the line breaks line up exactly with where my demo is. But the problem is their font size sometimes isn't exactly the same. Sometimes they haven't changed the font to be the same font that I'm using. And so like all of these things have an impact on where line breaks and other things are going to happen, but they want those line breaks the exact same place. So they end up with different widths on everything, and it gets really messy, and they start putting breaks and other stuff. Like, don't sweat those small details, no matter what you're working on. And, you might have a designer that you're working with who's like, no, you have to sweat those details. But it just becomes, the more you're trying to like get into the nitty gritty of all that, and then all of a sudden the layout's going to change anyway, because you change the size of the browser. So you're just going to drive yourself mad if you do stuff like that. So as much as possible, you might have to have a regular wrapper or container, a wide version of it, a narrow version of it, because some areas of your site are wide, narrow, or the in between. That's completely fine. But just don't go crazy trying to like be really, really specific where different line breaks are going to happen and stuff like that, because you're never going to get anywhere. And then the other example, and we're going to talk a bit more and get into Flex and Grid a little bit, is let's say here we wanted some columns. I'm just going to call it columns for a lack of a better term. And we get these three elements here, right? So let's say those three elements, those are, I'm going to cheat here because I don't have classes. Well, let's just do columns and just do a display flex for now. And we'll do a gap of 1 rem, just so I get 3 columns. And it sort of works. This one's bigger for various reasons. We'll talk a bit more about that a little bit later on. But the problem, the types of things that, again, I see people doing is they're trying to, like, these just need to fit into the space. And Flexbox is super accommodating because flex shrink is a thing, right? So these might have, we'll select them. We can say our columns and select the divs that are inside. And so people will say they have a width of like 500 pixels and a background. I'm just going to make it a light, we'll do pink just so we can see it, pink, and padding 1 rem or something. Because they needed it to be that size, especially if they're working on something like this. They had a specific size, and because Flexbox is accommodating and forces things to be flexible, as soon as you do that display flex on there, it sort of forces everything to squish in, and they might even do like a margin here, margin 2 rem or something, just to create some spacing. So it looks okay here, and then they turn on their flex, and then it all ends up stacking. Or you're using a media query even to do that. Again, a few different problems that start coming into it is I have margin here and I have a gap here. So margin is always something that's going to affect your layouts. It's going to get in the way of things. So having that on the children, I generally try to avoid unless I have a very good reason to do so. For when we're creating layouts, you want to, now that we have gap, and gap is a thing, it wasn't for a very long time, but now that we have gap and we can use gap, it's the greatest, and we can control our layouts completely here. So we might as well do that. And I generally avoid having a set width. The only exception here is I might say width 100%. I'm not going to come in and say width 33% or 33.33 or anything like that because I want 3 columns. I see that a lot still, where you'll have like a display flex, and this would be like, 3 columns because they need a 3 column area, and this is going to be 3 columns, and I won't set it up. But then the children all get this width. And then they're going to do the same thing for 4 and the same thing for 5. And they're putting percentages on everything. You don't need percentages unless it's for like a really specific thing. So, and that's what I was sort of saying before. Like, if you don't need widths, don't declare them. The only reason I would even put a width here, let's just change those names back really fast. The only reason I would put a width here is just because I want all 3 to have the same width. So the way Flexbox works, it actually makes them equal, because before they had different widths because of the way their content was working. So the one on the side here is bigger than the other ones. Miss Hart's asking what my go-to max width value is from the wrappers. I find it's the two things that are, it depends on the layout or the content that's going to be in them very much. So if it's a 1 column layout like I have right now, I'd actually, it's probably going to be very text heavy. So I'd actually probably do this in CH and do something like 65 or 75 CH. CH is the unit, like how many characters wide it is, roughly. It's right. So then, because you're sort of going more content based. Instead, you're basing it on like reading length, which makes things a lot easier. If I was going to do it in pixels, which I still do use, anywhere from 600 pixels up to like 900 pixels. 900-ish can be okay. And then after that, I find the lines start getting long, unless you have a really big font size, and then it might need to be, or then you can get away with it being wider. But I find once you get past like 950, not the classic 960 grid size, I would only do that if I'm going to have multiple columns or I have sidebars or other stuff coming into play. Welcome. I can't say your name. I'm sorry. There's another member who came in, but there's Chitsi 2. Chitsi 2. Nico, yeah, max widths are a different story. I tend to still avoid them, and I rely on the parent as much as possible, but I will have max widths on stuff. I do tend to avoid min widths on a lot of things too, but again, it will come up, and there's times where you have it. I find the rule I had for min width is the same rule, though, that I have for just width. You'll have stuff like an image that's like a small thing that's not really layout related. It's a piece of content that just needs a specific size. Either a min width, a min width can come into play there, especially if you're using Flexbox and there's like, you want to make sure it doesn't get smaller than something and the other content is going to continue shrinking. Then it can definitely come into play. Or you could even use that, like, okay, let's say this is a sidebar and main area. So we only have 2 columns. We'll just call this one class equals sidebar. And this one be class equals main. Whoops, I hit the wrong key on my keyboard. Main. So for something like that, you might say that your dot main has a min width of 600 pixels or something. And the advantage with that, let's make that bigger. Did I call it main? Whoa, we did an arrow function for some reason. Okay. No, I just put an equal sign. It still doesn't want to work though. My equal sign was in the wrong spot. There we go. So in situations like that, it's a bit big. But in situations like that, having, it keeps that static and the other part stays squishy. So in situations like that, having min widths can definitely come into play and be useful. United's asking, not United, Untitled is asking about vertical spacing and issues that come up. There is the baseline alignment you can use with Flexbox. It is, in general, hard. Vertical alignment is something that's really tough with CSS. We have the line height unit now and the root line height units, which I think can help create a better general flow to things, but it's not something I've had much trying with, and I've just sort of given up on having the magazine style, like very standard sizing to stuff. Okay, so a few things came up while I was doing that I saw in the chat that we're going to address. One of them was making them equal. I said not setting a width. I do set, well, there's 2 different things we can do there. Let's go back. Oh no, I went too far. Let's go to here and let's undo what I did here to go back to having 3 columns. Okay, I think I'm going to change this pink color. I don't really like it. Dark Dodger blue. That's nicer. Okay. First off, if you do have this and you want them to be the same, often the simple trick is a flex 1, which will work. You could also do a flex 100% or just a flex basis 100%. That would also work. You could even do a width 100%, and that would also work. Because flex is shrinking things, as long as they all, and the flex 1, the flex basis 100%, and width 100%, they're all going to have the same impact in that they're giving all of those elements the same size. The width is the same on all of them. So now when Flexbox is calculating how much to shrink things by, it's shrinking them all by the same amount because they're all starting off at the same size. And the advantage of doing this is then if you get rid of a column, then you have 2 columns. If you add a column, then you have an extra column, and they're always going to fit. Right, so that comes in handy right there. There was the question that sort of goes beyond this a little bit, which is what happens if you want to keep it 3 columns, but you might have more content in there. So in that case, it's 3 columns. You always want it to be 3 columns. So there, you might end up coming in with a number here. The problem I've always had with Flexbox is you do that and then do a flex wrap here of wrap. the problem is the 33% doesn't work anymore, because as soon as you bring wrap into the game and you have a gap, it just causes havoc, right? Because it's 33% plus 33%, but both of these, or these two, have a gap right now. And if we did bring a third one up here, it would have a gap there too. And so they're actually too big to fit. And because they're too big to fit, it wraps and it shrinks down. And so it's really frustrating. So what you end up doing is putting a smaller number here that's sort of magic numbery. And then you come on them and you also say that they have a flex grow of 1. So when there's that leftover space, it'll work. I always hated having to do this, which is why I actually prefer just using grid and then saying it's a grid template columns of repeat 3 1FR, because I know I need 3 columns. And then I don't need any of that. I don't need to do anything else, and I know it's going to work. If it's fixed amounts of columns, grid, and the columns are always the same size, even if they're different sizes, you could make those different too. Grid is a lot easier. If you need wrapping content, sometimes Flex is the right solution. But for just a structured layout that has a set amount of columns, grid, to me, would always win. I want to say a very big thank you to Zilliman, who just subscribed on Twitch. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate that. Thalamus is asking if flex basis here works the same way as width. It does, yes. It works exactly the same way. The only time that flex basis is different is if you change the flex direction. And in that case, flex basis changes with the flex direction. So instead of width, it's now impacting the height. Whereas if you set a width, it's always just on the width. When would you use flex shrink? Right now I'm using flex shrink. I haven't changed it, but the default is flex shrink, which is why if we went back to what I had before, if I put 100%, it worked. It was setting them all the same size, and they were all just shrinking down. So Flexbox by default doesn't have grow on, but it does have shrink on, which is why Flexbox works and why it's a good thing to have. Lana, I wouldn't suggest mix matching Bootstrap with Flex and Grid. Bootstrap's just using Flex, and I think you can use Grid with it now. That's what it uses for its layouts anyway. If you want to use Bootstrap, knowing Flex and Grid's probably good, because you could be more, you could change their system a little bit. But I do think that their layout system is much less needed now than it used to be, now that we have Flexbox and Grid. And then, yeah, exactly. So just building off on what we said here, you could have a display grid with your, keep your gap of 1 rem, and you have your nice simple layout this way. And then if you really needed to, you just come in and do a media query. Min width is 750. We're going to talk more about media queries in a little bit, though. But then I had my columns, and then I just add, we don't need the gap. You just add the columns when you get to that size. That works if you know that's what you want. But that actually leads to me to a good thing that I want to talk about. We'll look at this example instead. No, actually, we'll stay here for a minute, and then we'll come to the other one. Or no, we'll go to this one. We will go to this. It's the same thing. I just added a thing at the top, and I styled my cards a little bit. Tower of Brilliance columns. Oh, okay. We'll go back to this example really fast. So I use the class name columns. I probably wouldn't actually call it that, but a good question about the actual, instead of a display grid, we do have columns 3. We could do that too, and it's going to give me 3 columns. You'll notice a few different things, though. It looks a bit different than it did before. Columns creates columns, but it's actually like this is the first one, and this is the second one, and then this is the third one, the fourth one, the fifth one, the sixth one. So it goes down and then wraps up, and then down, wraps up, down, wraps up. The cool thing with columns, if I say 3 and then 300 pixels, they want to be 3. It wants to be 3 columns. It wants to be 300 pixels, but it will. Let's make that 2, just so we actually have room for them. We can get there, but it's going to automatically just like figure things out for us. But because it starts here, goes down, and then back up, it's not really useful for this type of layout. And right now it's not actually happening, but it's possible that this gets cut in half and the bottom half of this actually comes up to the next column. There's ways of preventing that from happening, but it is something that can happen by default. And just because the reading order goes that way, it's more for text. If you're doing like a magazine style layout and you want something that's too, like you just put 20 paragraphs in there and it's going to figure out where those two columns are going to break on its own based on the different stuff it has. Sometimes you're setting a height for that type of thing to work too. But yeah, columns are the niche thing that'll come up every now and then, but you're probably not going to use them very often. Cool, Johnny. You can use grid and position absolute work really well together. If you want to overlap stuff, they work like magic. Because you can assign things to specific cells, and then it's positioned absolute across those areas and stuff. It's great. All right. So yeah, I'm going to jump on over to this example, and that's because I looked at a media query. But the other thing when it comes to creating responsive layouts that people do is they jump right away to media queries, and I'd say a media query should always be the last thing that you look at doing. And adding complexity to things is probably the last thing that you want to be doing. So if we look here, and I feel bad for people that watch me a lot because this is the same example I always give, but here where I have my nav at the top, and then I have my UL that's inside of there. So we're just targeting this list that's right here. And we could either do a display grid or a display flex on there. And so right now I am talking a bit about how you choose between the two as well, but I want to talk about the idea of intrinsic layouts. So navigations, I think most people go flex is the right way to go. So you do a display flex and you do your gap and it works. There's one really annoying thing with Flexbox. I'm going to make my font size here a bit bigger too. Font size. There's a really annoying thing with Flexbox that it's almost really good at being responsive out of the box. Like stuff squishes down, it makes columns, it does a lot of stuff, but it inherently causes overflow once you run out of room, right? So like things just smash into each other, and then eventually it can't do it because by default, Flex wants to keep all of the things it's created. It wants them to always be there. So because of that, then people create a media query to change the Flex direction. It really depends on the content and the layout a lot. But for things like this that are just a list of things or tags on a card or anything that's like small bits of information that you just need next to each other, just throwing a Flex wrap on there is 100% the way to go. And when we do that, now all of a sudden they just wrap down and it works really well. One thing I will say is if you have a gap, often you actually want the gap to be smaller vertically than you do because the gap is a shorthand. So you might want a bigger gap left and right and a smaller gap up and down just because it looks more balanced out. The vertical gap can look really big even when the horizontal one looks really small when it's the same number. So just to throw that out there. But then I get a nice responsive thing without having to build a hamburger menu or add a whole bunch of complexity into my site. And this is the idea of an intrinsic layout where the browser is just figuring it out on its own without me having to do anything. It just works and it's amazing. And so I always this is my first instinct is always like, how can I get the browser to do the hard work for me instead of me having to add more code to try and accomplish whatever I'm trying to do. So if I want stuff just to stack, well, eventually it's going to get there once it runs out of room. And it's just a really nice way to work. So just adding a flex wrap on there is generally all you want to do. We can do the same thing with grid. I probably should have made more cards here. So we're going to grab all these cards. We're going to put in a whole bunch. We'll have like 9 of them. So here, let's just do, we'll call it, I usually just call it this because then I can use it anywhere I want on my site. And we're going to move all of those cards into there. You know what I just realized? I don't have a wrapper on this one either, but that's okay. Oh, we'll use this. I said I was going to talk about my other solution that I have. So we'll talk a bit about that after. So that's my grid auto fit. And for that, display grid, gap 1 rem. Let's make it 2 just so it's bigger. Right away, I like grid because by default, it keeps the flow going this way. And a lot of the time that's what you want at small screen sizes anyway. So I don't actually have to do any work there. It just does it. And this really goes with my path of least resistance mindset, and I'm using that as like, when I first started talking about the path of least resistance, it was using media queries. We're going to talk more about that later. But I've started realizing it works for everything. So like if I just need my content stacked, I'm not going to do a display flex and then change the flex direction and then add a gap if I can just use grid instead and get the exact same result. If you're using gap, then grid has better browser support than Flexbox gap has browser support. So I don't want to hear that argument from anybody. You will get a timeout from one of my mods if you complain about grid's browser support. And then I can just do my grid template columns. And this is, I know people, the biggest reason people tell me they don't use grid is because it's like complicated. If this is the only thing you do with grid, then you're great. So you do a repeat, and it's weird for sure. Auto fit. And then we'll put this on another line just so we can see it all. And then we need a min-max. So like the syntax here is strange. It's really long. There's quite a like grid template columns. It's already a long property. Repeat. Okay, I'm sure you can remember that. Then it's an auto fit. There's also an autofill. Just use autofit. There's times for autofill, but they're very few and far between in my experience. And then a min-max. So there's like 2 new functions that only exist in grid. I get it. There's new stuff to learn, but this is the only line. If you're hesitant to start learning grid, start with this. And then here we say a minimum size, and we're going to make this a bit weirder too, but then a maximum size, 1FR, another unit there too. And then we just get a responsive grid of cards, and it just works, and it's going to fit and work. So again, it's the idea of an intrinsic layout. I'm not worried about when this is happening. I'm not trying to come up with a breakpoint on when it's going to happen. I'm letting the browser figure it out based on this minimum size that I've given it. There's 2 huge advantages to working this way. And it's the same with my navigation at the top. The browser's just figuring it out based on the size of the thing. Like as soon as that R team doesn't fit anymore, it goes on a new line, which is just like regular text does, right? The huge advantage with this though is when you're doing it with a media query, you're having to look at the size of the viewport and then look at the size of the different things in there. And you might have 3 columns or 2 columns or whatever it is. And you're trying to figure out like when is the best time for those to go from 2 to 3 columns. And that can be hard to figure out. Whereas if you're doing it here, you're just looking at the size of the card. And I can say, actually, I want the smallest the card can get to be 25 CH, which is about 25 characters wide. And so that's like about as narrow as it looks comfortable. I'm not worried about the size of the viewport. I could throw this anywhere and it's going to work. And to me, that's so much nicer than having to be like, okay, well, I have 20, okay, around here, my viewport, you're trying to use your dev tools and stuff to figure out the size of your viewport. Relying on the size of the element itself is so much more just user-friendly and much easier to wrap your mind around when these different breaks are happening. And it just works. So it's really cool. The only problem you can run into here, and this is where, again, it can be a little bit weird. Let's make it like 500 pixels because you never know. You might have something that needs to be quite big as its minimum size. So it breaks right here when they get to 500 pixels. That does also mean that they will never get smaller than 500 pixels. So it's actually causing some horizontal overflow, which obviously we don't want. We're making responsive layouts. So this does look weird. It's the one little addition here, but we do this. Where it's going to choose the smaller of these 2 values. And you can already see I don't actually get any overflow anymore. So it's saying if the element choose 500 pixels or 100% as the smaller size. So if 100% is bigger than 500 pixels, well, 500 pixels is the smaller value. So it's using this as the minimum size. Whereas as soon as the parent is smaller than 500 pixels, it switches over to that and uses the 100% instead. So it's a little weird to wrap your mind around. I think I have videos that talk about it in more detail, but it's just a nice, I always have a min function here, even if this is a really small value, just because it's a nice little safeguard on preventing overflows. And yeah, this is like grid, like a nice, just simple way to work with grid and get a layout that's just going to work. And it goes back to that idea that I'd mentioned earlier when I was talking about this card where I said you don't really want to set the width on this. Usually it's where you're putting it that has the width. And when you get to layouts like this is where you start seeing it, because that card's probably never just living on its own. It's probably going into something like a grid like this. So the grid is the parent is controlling how the layout's looking, and then that card is being placed into that layout. And I know sort of the constraints of what it's working with right there. Laxan asking, when people zoom in the browser and they're saying it's not looking good, to be compliant with the minimum standards for accessibility, your site should work up to a 200% zoom. And I think 400% is actually considered like the 200% is what you have to meet. And 400% I think is considered sort of what you should strive for. Zooming in, your site should, if your site works on a phone, if you're on a desktop computer and you zoom in a lot, it probably will work. There'll be differences. It's worth testing and just seeing how things are changing. But it's hard to do in a code pen to start zooming in and out on layouts. But we could look at something else a little bit. Can auto be used in place of the 100%? That's a good question. I don't think so. Oh, no, it broke the whole thing. I didn't think you could. In min-max, all the values have to be actual values, because I don't think it can go with the 100. It can't. I'm trying. What's the right word? It can't evaluate it properly if it has an auto in there, because it doesn't. It makes the min function here crap out, basically. But I don't think you'd ever need it. The only time that would become an issue, and it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, don't set 100% width, which we're sort of saying to do here. The only time this would come up is if your children, grid, auto, fit. Let's just choose the first child and child 1. If I add margin left of, I don't know, 50 pixels, I think, yeah, right, that's going to, or we'll do 150. I think, is that going to make it? Oh, look, it didn't even break it. I thought that potentially, to me, was the only thing that could potentially actually break that from happening, but it's not. And the reason that actually isn't breaking anything is because this is being set on the parent. We're not saying the size of the children here. We're setting up a grid on the parent, and the child is fitting inside of that. So the 100% here is just saying be as wide as my grid auto fit. So it's actually looking at its own width in that 100%. It's another reason percentages are awkward, is because they look at different things, right? Sometimes a percent will look at the parent size, other times it will look at its own size. I'm 99% sure that in this declaration, it's actually looking at the size of itself. So it's saying never be, the grid cells that we're creating can never be wider than the size of the element. And someone's going to go and break that and show me how it doesn't work that way. But yeah, I think that's how it works. Shinatu Kulkarni, 100% viewport width and height. No, never use 100% viewport width. ever. You don't need it. Especially on the body. The body's already 100% width. I would do a min height of 100 VH if you need it, just in case, right? Beaky Bellamy, yeah, that's a good way to do it. I use outline instead of border, just because border does shift things a little bit. You can also add everything, give everything. They're asking about debugging in CSS. If you add a, we can do it now, except I don't really have, we can try. If you just do a star has background of HSL, it's 0, 50%, 50% over 0.1, maybe even a 0.05. Make it a bit brighter. Whoops, no, that one stays at 50. This one goes up to 100. You can sort of start seeing how things are like overlapping each other, which can be useful as well. We'll do it with the 0.5 there. So if something is sticking out from another element, you can sort of start seeing it. My color choice doesn't work super well on the black here. The lighter colors, I think, actually were working a bit better. But you can start seeing layering of things, which can make it easier. So either that or an outline. of 1 pixel solid. And of course, we'd want to actually see those outlines. So you can see everything, and then that can help you know when something's sticking out. I just need some water. Donnie Sam, I missed the beginning of the question that you and Beck are talking about. If you write it, I don't know if it's a question or an ongoing discussion, but if there was a question in that and you want to reword it, let me know, or just repost the question again. Astrulias is asking the 25ch here. So that's the minimum size. So when it goes from 1 column to 2 columns, it's because this can be 25ch wide, and that's going to continue growing. And then as soon as we can get 3 of them that fit in, then the minimum size to create a new column is for that new column to be 25ch wide. How would I make a grid such that the left column has a max content and the right column is a max content, but up to the bigger parent width? I'm not sure what you mean, Avi. I'm sorry. Remco, you definitely could. That's a really good question. So you could do that. This could be var. You don't even need to make it a local variable technically. You could just say min call size, let's say, comma 25ch. So if I do it as a custom property this way, this custom property is not being defined anywhere. That's up to you. You could have that actually defined somewhere. It's still going to work exactly the same way because this isn't defined. We're just using the 25 as a fallback. But then you could either have modifiers for that, or you could just come in here and do a style is equal to min call size of, I don't know, 150 pixels, whatever you need. And then that overwrites it, and then we have a new grid. Definitely, usually a lot of these things that I'm talking about now, I would say that there's a lot of use cases for setting them up using custom properties instead. Donnie Sim's asking if you have 2 columns. Whoops, I'm sorry. I moved my mic closer than I'm used to. I hope that wasn't too loud for you. If you have 2 columns, they get smaller. We want the thing on the right side to wrap to the top instead of wrapping to the bottom. Is that possible to do without media queries? No. I don't think so. I'm just trying to, because either the order would have to change, so you need a media query there. If you did it with grid, you wouldn't be able to make it wrap. I'm just trying to think with Flexbox. Is there any way? I can't think of any way that you could do that without the use of a media query. Flex call, yeah, the reverse options for the Flexbox wouldn't work either because, oh, maybe that would, no, because it would have, they want it on top sometimes and on the right other times. So again, you need some sort of media query to define when that's happening. Because if not, if in the HTML, like if, I'm not going to make this, but if we did div and then image and paragraph, if I row reverse, if we reverse, wrap reverse wouldn't work. Maybe row, okay, we'll try it. 1 second. I'm getting sidetracked. I apologize. Let's just grab this. I'll do it as a large. People are asking about images, so I'll talk a bit more about those in a minute. This will overflow right now. And let's say we have lorem. I don't use the reverse stuff a lot in Flexbox. So someone was asking about images, making them responsive. The first thing is I said, if you don't write any CSS, your website is responsive. That's not true for images. So you do want to put a max width 100% on those. And often you'll also do the display block. And now my image is responsive. And there, aspect ratio can really help out as well. So I can say like aspect ratio of something. If you're changing the aspect ratio though, just make sure you put an object fit of cover on there as well. So let's just give this one, we're going to call it class is equal to test. And if we do a test and we do display flex, and then we say, it will, okay, then we're just going to do test, select the children, and we'll say width 100%. Images as flex items are a nightmare. So often we just put the image in a div and it fixes that. There we go. So we have two columns. We can do a flex wrap of wrap. Whoops, flex wrap. Flex wrap of wrap. They're always wrapped right now, but I'm just thinking if we did a width. I don't want. There's ways of doing it that are without a media query. Let's just say that the image has the same size here. So I'm just going to use some nesting. Width is say 300 pixels or something. Right? So now this is where the things change a little bit. We'll just do a flex one. Would a flex one here work actually? Yeah, it would. Okay. So that happens. And then if they run out of room, so I can say this has a min width of 300 pixels. So when it runs out of room, it will wrap down. Now, if we do now we're getting into where I don't know things as well. It would be, one second, somebody had the answer earlier. Because we have wrap reverse, but I don't, oh, that would work. I was thinking the opposite would happen. So if we take that and we actually put it after my paragraph, oh no, yeah, it's there. And oh, there you go. Flex wrap, wrap reverse. When it wraps, it reverses. Something I don't think I've ever done before. So that's kind of cool. Nice. Who was it that recommended that? I appreciate that. Miss Hart, thank you. Perfect. I don't know if I've used wrap reverse like outside of my Flexbox course when I went really deep into Flexbox. So we have the text is first, the image is second, and then which means text is first, image is second, but we have a flex wrap on there. So when they do wrap, they wrap in the reverse order. So if we had a third thing in there, let's just add a P style color is red, lorem, just so we can see and make sure we understand this properly. It's 1, 2, 3, and then when it wraps, oh, is that going to wrap? That's never going to, oh, there we go. Yeah, now it's wrapping in the reverse order it was. Be really careful if you do this, because if you have tab stuff, it's going to change the order of things. So be really, with any of these reversing or changing order or anything like that, same with grid. I love grid template areas, changing the layout of something. Just be very careful when you do that for accessibility reasons and stuff, and tab orders and everything there. But cool, we found a solution. All right. So I'm going to keep going with what I had planned. So we'll get rid of this test here, and we'll get rid of all of this. So the next thing I want to talk about is like I looked at here like Grid and Flexbox, and how they're good at different, or at sort of similar things in this, and the idea of using intrinsic layouts. And again, intrinsic layouts, we want to let the browser do as much heavy lifting as it can with hints from us, instead of us having to hard code things in. I do know if you're working at a company or you're working with a designer, they have a set design in mind, and they're like, you have to match it exactly, and it can be a little bit hard to work around. I would, as much as possible, encourage a lot of discussion with the person that's saying that, just because they're working on a fixed layout. They're not working on something that actually needs to be able to move. So if you code it up and they're looking at it at the exact size in their browser that they wanted it, and it's not exactly the same and they complain to you, don't just put your head down and try and fix it. Have a discussion with them about, like, this is why I did it this way, because in these different situations at different screen sizes, it's adapting in these different ways. How would you envision this working? And make them aware that this needs to happen, because a lot of people that work on designs and just live in Figma all day long, they don't look at the in-between states. They do, here's this size, here's this size, here's this size. They don't really stress about the in-between because they don't code. They don't think about that as much as they should, just because no one's told them they should. So if you bring that up and then it becomes part of their decision-making process and making it happen, it can also go a long way. Oh, Alvaro's here. I don't know if you were here at the beginning, but we were looking at your Batman. I was saying that the stream almost became a stream of me making a Batman comic instead. Okay. So the thing I want to talk about now, continuing with this, is like, we have Flexbox, we have Grid. They both are things that can make intrinsic layouts and work without having to have media queries. And I'm going to make this one longer. Our team members, just for fun, to hammer home something here. If you've been following me for a while, lately I've had a lot of Grid videos, and then I kept making more because people kept pushing back on the use of Grid, which would drive me nuts. And things like browser support came up. Things like, what else? It was browser support came up, that Flex can do everything, so why bother with Grid, and things like that. And I find I get it, right? You learn one, you're comfortable with it, you can do most things with it, but a lot of the time you're making harder to maintain things if you're using the wrong tool for the wrong job. There's a lot of overlap between what you can do with Flexbox and what you can do with Grid, but Grid has its strengths and Flexbox has its strengths. So I really always encourage people to lean into the strengths of each one of them. And let's talk a little bit about the strengths. To do that, we're going to get these list items, and we're just going to put an outline on them. Let's use Lime, so we can see those there. Maybe we'll make it a bit bigger so we can really see them. And the reason I'm going to say this, especially if you're newer to CSS, put backgrounds or outlines on everything so you can actually see what you're working with, because we're always dealing with boxes, but most of our boxes have transparent backgrounds on them. So add backgrounds to everything so you can see them, you understand a little bit more of what's actually going on. So because we have my display flex and I have a flex wrap there, as soon as these don't have enough room, that one goes down. This one doesn't have enough room, it goes down. So on and so forth. It just keeps going. And then our team members will actually break at this point and start sort of like squishing, but only if it has to. And the other ones won't, because they're as small as they can. And in general, Flexbox, what it tries to do is it's almost like a fit content, which is an intrinsic property that we have that works a lot like this, where it makes each one of these elements as small as it can be without causing any line breaks or anything else inside of them. And then if you do have Flex Wrap on, it's going to wrap them first. And then if it runs out of room, it'll start squishing them with the Flex Shrink on there. But the Flex Shrink is sort of a last case scenario. If you don't have Flex Wrap on, it's the opposite, where it's going to, you can see that our team members is the one that starts squishing down because the flex shrink on there is able to kick in. And then that's as small as it can get, and then it just causes the overflow at that point. But Flexbox is really good at dealing with things like this where everything is a different size. So our team members is really long, contact, well, all of these other ones in this case are short. Maybe we can come up with another V articles just to have a different length in there. But if everything is a different size and you just want everything to be as big as it needs to be, then Flexbox is a great choice because everything will just be the size it needs to be, and it works, right? There's no overcomplicating it. It does that automatically without you having to do anything, which is awesome. Again, we're letting the browser figure it out for us. If I wanted to, let's get rid of, well, let's do a display grid here instead. So that does this. So we don't get them next to each other right away, which is kind of annoying. And then you could do a grid auto flow of column. So this will make it act a little bit more like Flexbox in that it's going to make a column for each one of them. The problem now, though, is like my spacing becomes inconsistent. And we don't really see it because I put these outlines on stuff. But if I turn those outlines off, the spacing between them is weird in a sense, just because like they're not all sort of matching the way they were before. And now this one's breaking. We get this huge space over here just because it had to squish them and stuff. We could change now the grid auto flow, grid auto columns to be min content, or fit content would probably work. Fit content. Maybe that would actually get it to behave. That's not even working. I think there's a thing I could do here, but why would I even care how I could do it when I can just do a display of flex and that's it, right? Or if I need the flex wrap on there, I can add the flex wrap on there. So for me, for things that just need to be the size they need to be, Flexbox is always my way to go. For more controlled layouts, almost all the time, I'm using grid these days. There's exceptions to the rule, and there's some hacky stuff. I call it hacky. It's not really hacky. If you go to every layout, I'll open it up. I'll put a link to in the chat. If you want to learn more about layouts, it is a paid product, but they do have some free ones. It's by Andy Bell and Hayden Pickering. Right there. Oh, is my layout thing broken? Anyway, I'll fix it in a second. I just realized it might be. But it's very heavy on Flexbox and in intrinsic layouts, but you have to push how both of them work a little bit to get it to work. And I made my browser bigger. I didn't realize I was covering my face the way I was. We can make that like that, I guess. There we go. So I really like, often if I have like a structured layout that I need, I like using grid. I can have this type of layout with just 3 cards going. That works fine. There's no problem with that at all, right? It works. I know how many columns, well, I don't know how many columns I have, but again, they're coming in as I need them to be. But even if I just needed to come in here and just say repeat 3 1FR, like we looked at earlier, just means make 3 equal columns. And then I can place whatever content I need inside those 3 columns. And I know I have 3 columns, and they're just going to work, and they're going to squish and grow and stuff. And I get 3 equal columns with whatever I throw at it, basically, which is awesome. It's exactly what I want. And I don't want to have to fight with that. I could do the same thing here. Let's turn all this off and do it again with Flexbox. So I do a display flex. Then I do a gap of 2 rem. So far, everything is the same. But the problem now is they're not actually the same size. And that means I actually have to go on the children, grid, auto, fit, select the children, and we looked at this a bit before. We'll just use the flex 1. If any of those options, they would work. And I have a syntax error right there. And once that updates, I forgot a dot. Once that updates, then they become equal again. But like just having to make this extra selector for me, if I don't need to, I don't want to. So I'm not going to do that. So that's why I prefer, even if it's just like people talk about 1D versus 2D and things like that, for simple layouts where I want to be able to throw whatever content I need into there, I prefer going with this approach and using grid. just because I know I'm setting up my grid and then I'm placing content in that grid. There's different things we can do to make grid responsive and work well. So if anybody has any questions about those, let me know what they are, because we can talk a bit about them now. I lost my YouTube chat. We'll bring that back up. There we go. I do see one question. If you make a grid with 12 rows, is it possible that every element directly has the full width of 12 rows, or do you explicitly have to declare it? You would have to explicitly declare it. I would do, first of all, I wouldn't do a 12-column grid these days. But I said we're going to talk about this. I'm going to do it here. Display, and I'll take questions and stuff as I'm doing this. So instead of containers, I've started doing this a lot. And someone asked about subgrid before too. So this can, we don't really need it, but it can play into it. I'm going to do a simpler example of it because the math gets kind of weird. But let's just say we do a grid template columns, and I'm going to say a min max of 1 rem 1 fr, I think, yes. Then a min of 100%, comma, let's say 65ch. And then we're going to copy paste this. So that's on my body. So everything sort of just like does its own thing right now. So the question was like, how can I get it all to go where I need it to? You can select the direct children and just say grid column. And I'm going to say 2/3 in this case, because I don't want them to be full width. But then I can get everything living within my container. This will work exactly. This is overflowing because I broke it. Flex wrap. And let's bring this back down to a 1. So yeah, there we go. This will work. I have, oh, this is overflowing too, probably. Why is that overflowing? Oh, because I set that this way. We'll just turn that off for now. Still overflowing. What did I muck? Oh, I know what I mucked up. This is a calc. Oh, you don't need the calc. 100% minus 2 rem. This is where percentages get annoying because you have 1 rem on the left and the right. So 100% of the body is going to be a little bit too wide. So just you'd use custom properties ideally here. Anyway, there we go. This works the same as a container would. The advantage with something like this. So yeah, if you wanted something to spread across all of them, you could just do that. And then you could have a full width class. And then that would just be grid column of 1/-1. And then I could come on my header and say that as a class of full width. And then the header stretches the full size at the top. So something like that could work. Just give all the direct children to be full width, and then you change them from there. Miss Hart, is there wiggle room with the FR making equal column sizes? Because it takes into account the content size, then divides up the remaining space. It's only going to have wiggle room if they're really getting tight on space. If there's enough room, like when things start hitting their like minimum sizes and it's getting really squishy, there's potential for different sizes, yes. D short, how to be responsive for the container height. I just let it be as big as it needs to be and I don't worry about it. Mushio? Yes, there is. Let's set. Oh, here. So the question is, they've had designers complaining that when this happens in typography, this is called an orphan, when there's a little word sitting all on its lonesome at the end of a line. Is that a widow? I think a widow is if it's in columns and it splits up to the top. So you can just do this paragraph, and it's text wrap, pretty, and it will prevent that from happening. You can also, let's muck up my lines. We're going to do this. Let's see if it works. H1, text wrap balanced. Should change my heading. Maybe. Is it balance? Balance, there we go. So text wrap balance is if you have 3 lines of text or less, so it's more for headings, and it's just to make them look more balanced out instead of having it like long lines with 1 or 2 words at the end. And text wrap pretty is if there's more than 3 lines of text, so it's more for your paragraphs, your list items, other things like that, and it will prevent there ever from being one word wrapped all in its all on its own at the end of a line. Balance has better browser support. Pretty is not amazing, but it's not terrible at this point either. Lori, are you asking me if I'm still doing WordPress? I'm not. I haven't touched it in a long time. Text wrap pretty is the best thing you've heard today. Awesome. I don't know what the support for it is, but the nice thing with text wrap pretty is it's a progressive enhancement. So it's, you know, if a browser doesn't support it, it just doesn't work, but it doesn't cause any issues. Can you guys hear my dog barking in the background? I hope not. Pretty. We should probably do text wrap. Oh, it's there. Ooh, it's only in Chromium. I didn't realize that. I thought it was also in Safari. Whereas balance is in all of them? Question mark? Text wrap style. I didn't even know we had text wrap style. Okay, so balance is pretty good support. There it is. Pretty good support. There it is there. Okay. Whereas Safari just added it. Huh. I thought it was for longer in Safari too. Oh well. But the pretty is only Chromium right now, sadly. You kind of hear the dog. Okay. Not too loud then. How is that possible to make balance fallback for pretty? There's not really, you can't really do a fallback for it. It just doesn't work. Simon, do I have any must-nots for when creating responsive sites for certain properties, units, combinations of them? So again, setting fixed widths, setting fixed heights are like the 2 big ones for layout stuff. Again, not for like small little things that you might be doing. Oh, Ragnar, yeah. Try not to use position absolute for the layout itself. It's good for positioning things. It can, if you're using grid, there's times where it comes in and it can be really good to do. The site, yeah. Can I use .com? Sounds like a tiny dog. Yes, it is, Mr. Johnson. It's 6 pounds. Okay, Subgrid. Yeah, we could talk a bit about that. So here, when I set this up, this isn't the best use case for it, to be honest. I'm trying to, I'm going to open it in another screen. Code pen. I'm trying to get it. I'm not, oh, whoops. That won't do. I'll just do this. I'm trying to, the example I was going to give, you don't need it for. So let's look up Subgrid in my code pen because I have lots of videos on it. Whoops. Oh my God, I'm all over the place. I apologize. And I'm not showing you anything, so it's not very good. Search for Subgrid. I have no, oh, that's collections. Okay. I was like, how do I have nothing in my code pen coming up for Subgrid? Okay, this is a good example. Here's 2. This is one where if you want list items to line up with each other, I'm using Subgrid for my grid template rows. So if I turn that off, see how like this is longer, so it sort of throws everything off. So if you're doing a comparison list or something like that, it doesn't really work. So the grid is being set up on my parent, and then on the other one, I'm also doing a display grid, but the rows are Subgrid. So the grid rows are shared from the parent instead, just for people who don't know how Subgrid works. It's basically saying use the parent's grid instead of creating your own. So the content of the child impacts the grid of the parent, which is interesting. With rows, it is annoying though, because you need to span them. And I didn't really come up with a good solution other than just like going a little heavy on like just have it span extra ones, because it needs to span at least as many columns as you have rows of content. But what happens if you span too many is all the other ones are just 0 pixels tall at the bottom. So that's what you can do. That's one good use case. And the other one is, this one is a good one as well, where I have different content in all of these cards, and I want to make sure that the images are always lining up with each other. And I just found the easiest way to do that. I have my card grid, so the parent grid is set up, but that parent grid is, I'm actually saying, let's just put this on multiple lines so we can see it. I have like a min max for my image, then I have a 1FR for here, and then I'm actually repeating the grid again on the side for this side. And the reason I'm doing that is so the children can use a subgrid. Because if I turn off the subgrid there, and I just use something here, you can see like all of them are different sizes. There's ways around having to do that, obviously. I'm using min content here, so I could do something like 300 pixels, and then I can lock that into a specific value. Oh, it's still broken for some reason. Probably because the size of my text. I'm trying to think why that's still broken, but whatever. I'm not going to dive too deep into it. It's a use case that I really like, and it makes it even more. It makes it even easier to be responsive and stuff along the way. So I probably have some widths or something coming in. So setting up the grid, the children go in there, and they all have to rely on the parents' grid. I like that use case there. Oh no, I just lost my screen. We're back. Okay. My screen went completely black. Please start React Native UI CSS. I'm not a big React person, so that's probably not going to happen. Dustin, I haven't talked about the breakout grid. Well, I mean, I was sort of looking at that idea here, but I don't use the, I wouldn't use that for subgrid. I was going to do it for the subgrid, and I'm like, oh, it's not really worth it. Can you make your nav sticky, and when clicked, the ID doesn't go behind? Yeah, you just want to put a scroll padding top, or just scroll padding wherever you have your, or on your HTML element, and it's going to create the gap you want. Unlucky Clover, do I prefer straight HTML over React, Angular, or Vue? Do I use any frameworks? A couple overlapping things there. So it depends on what I'm working on, obviously. If it's a simple project, I'll just do regular stuff. I use Astro a lot these days for things, just because HTML not having any templating stuff sucks. So making components is very useful. So Astro is sort of a nice way to level up. I'm doing a project right now using SvelteKit as well. Thalamus, the two demos I just showed are from my, I've covered in depth in videos. I did a subgrid awareness month last year, 2 years ago, just before it actually landed in the other browsers. And I came up, I think I had 5 different examples I looked at over those videos. All right, I'm going to dive back into continuing with what we were talking about, some responsive layout stuff. So this idea again with like, how do you choose between Flexbox and grid? So again, how big do you want it to be? The size of the element, or is part of it? So like here, we're going to sort of break it down a little bit, where I have this product showcase that just has a bunch of products in there. And what we should do is the products, let's give them an outline again, just so you can see them. 3 pixels, solid, hot pink. There we go. Is it pink one of those weird ones where pink is more vibrant than hot? No, it isn't. Okay. We'll go with a hot pink. Just so we can see them. And so if I wanted to like lay these out in a layout, and I could use flex or grid, again, I could do a display flex here. And then start trying to figure out like, okay, how am I going to get this to work? Because then they all squish down and make them the same size. I'm going to probably have to add a flex wrap on there. I'm going to have to figure everything out. So the more I'm having to do right away makes me go, actually, I think I'm just going to do a display grid because I don't have to think about it as much, right? I get my grid, nothing really changes, gap 1 rem. That's perfect because it's already set up for small screens. Then I can start going, okay, maybe I just want it to be grid template columns. And again, this is sort of my go-to of the auto fit, min max. Let's just say we'll make it small, 200 pixels, 1FR. And then you take the 200 pixels, you put a min in front of it, and then you just do comma 100%. That's always going to work, right? And then it works for me. So maybe this is fine. This is what I want for a grid of cards like this too. I wouldn't want to get this to work with Flexbox because those bottom two would stretch out and fill all the space. And so it's definitely not the direction I'd want to go in. So for making simple grids of content, you never guessed it, grid is awesome. The other thing here is I don't have to touch the children. We saw when I did it with Flexbox before, the children sort of all got wonky. So I would have had to make a selector for the children and made some changes to them to get it to work. So it's where do I want the control as well, it comes down to it. Do I want to create a layout and plug content into that layout, or do I want to have a layout where the content actually does have some play in how it's going to work? There are definitely use cases for both of them. But it's you use the one, it really depends on what you're trying to create. But you use the one that you need to use. And for a lot of more layouty stuff, I find grid is the better choice. Not always, but a lot of the time. The other thing here, I saw a question about what's the FR. I think it's done. I always said it's one fraction. I actually think it's something different, and I'm pretty sure it relies on the Flexbox algorithm to work. Yeah. Herb, what if I wanted to center the two on the bottom? That's something I wouldn't be able to do with grid, because grid is making a very structured grid. So if I come and take a look at the grid that it's creating, I haven't really opened my DevTools at all, but it's creating this grid. The color is kind of unfortunate because it's the same color as the outline I have. So let's change that color. Let's make it green, I guess. So it makes this like very structured grid. So I can't have an element go in between those grid lines. Just not how grid is going to work. So that's one of those times where you go, well, I need that to happen. So that's where Flexbox is actually kind of easy to do. So then you go over to Flexbox. There's a bit more wrangling again to get the sizes to be correct. Oh, thank you, Ragnar. Flexible ratio, FR, flexible ratio. But that's like with these at the top here, my navigation, when these are wrapping, like the rows of content with Flexbox are independent from one another. And we'll see that a bit more on this example. But yeah, with grid, the rows of content and the columns of content aren't independent from one another. They live in the same grid. Whereas with Flexbox, every row is independent from the other row. So then you can get things that cross over, and the way things line up don't really matter. So 100%, if I needed these two to be centered there, I wouldn't use grid. In that case, I would use Flexbox. Zilliman, I'd be really careful asking any AI what CSS stuff is, because I had one of them tell me that the CI unit, which doesn't actually exist, is for centimeters. Andreas, yes, this video will be on the replay will be up. Beaky, what would you do for a really wide monitor? I wouldn't make anything for a really wide. I have as wide of a monitor as you can get. Right, I have the super ultra wide. I never have anything bigger than, I don't know, 1600 pixels wide. I just have lots of windows spread out across it. Because if you did, the only way you can make a layout work that's on a really wide layout would be completely rearranging it, because you can't have text go wide. So you'd be like, if I had a layout like this one, I mean, I wouldn't even want, like if these, I'm sorry, I did it again. Usually my mic's a bit farther away from me. if these started stretching wider and wider and wider, I'd have to move, I'd literally on my screen would have to move my head if I full screened it. I don't know why I'd full screen it, but if I did, I'd still want the content in front of me so I could look at it without having to turn my head. The only thing I could think is on a dashboard, but a dashboard sort of makes more sense where you could have like different blocks of content. So I'm focusing on one block at a time, so you're moving around. But ultra wide monitors, like I'd put a max width of whatever I think works, and I'm happy with it. But yeah, there we go. That's my grid right there. So then my products themselves. So if we look at the product, I can choose, because I have like an image. Let's just look at the thing here. For my individual product, I have an image and I have a div. So I want this to be 2 columns. On this, I could choose either Flexbox or grid. And I still usually find most people will do, because it's just 2 columns, they're going to do a display flex. This is one where you could probably go either way and be okay. But you get this going on, which is kind of weird, right? I don't know why my images are going so crazy, to be honest, but I will say images as flex items can be problematic. So if you do have them, as you can see right now, the height I'm not surprised by. I'm a bit surprised by why some of them are stretching wider. I don't know what's causing that. But that's really weird. I wasn't expecting that. Huh, go figure. But the stretch isn't a big deal. You can just on-stretch something, right? You change your flex. Is it flex? Flex. It's not flex. It's your align items of start, and then we get rid of our stretch. Why? What did I break? Oh, I hate this. CodePen needs, if Chris is watching, which he probably isn't, but I really hate that using start here causes, like, it's a compilation error effectively here. Which drives me bananas. Flex start. And we sort of fix it. So there we go. I think I had an aspect ratio on my images or something, maybe. I don't remember, but it sort of fixes it. But everything's still kind of like not great, I guess, in how the layout's going right now. But that would work. I could do that. And, I probably should make my minimum width here a bit bigger. They're getting a bit too small, which is the other problem. So there we go. Maybe that's a bit better. And I could probably live with it and be okay with using that as an option. Or the other option that might give you, and I'm not saying you need to or not, because this is working completely fine, and it's just the images are just doing their thing at this point. But if you do a display grid, it's the same type of thing where I can just say that I need my grid template columns, and this is, do you need more control or not? And if I needed that extra control, I don't want to necessarily select my image. I can probably just come and select or set up my grid differently. So I could say this is, I don't know, 50 pixels and then 1 FR. And then I get a bit of a smaller image and I can control my layout without actually having to select it, because I have my image and it's fitting in there and it's working. Ragnar is very mad at me because he wants me to use the grid shorthand. But would it really be like that? I never use the grid shorthand. That doesn't work, right? You have to do that. How do you even get it to work? I don't know. I never, ever use the grid shorthand. So anyway, so it's just 2 different options that you have. I sort of, again, if I know I need something to be a specific size, and because I don't like images being flex items, most of the issues with them has been fixed, but I just have this tendency to go to grid. I do have a bit of a grid bias. So if you went flex here, I don't think there's an issue at all. They both work perfectly fine. On the other hand is the meta. If we come and look at the meta area, where I have, like, the meta area is like slightly darker right there. So we have the meta inside of there. I have the little comment thing, and I have the tags. So those are all different sizes, and I want them to stay different sizes. I don't want to try and like wrangle something with a defined grid. I just want them to do what they need to do. So a display of flex with the gap that I already have on there is going to work, and then it looks a lot better right there. So I like doing that. I realized I didn't want a background color on the comments there, but that's okay. I set it up very fast here. But we can see just, oh, it's highlighting the wrong thing too. That doesn't help. But yeah, each one of those elements, I guess we can do it here. Outline 2 pixels solid, hot pink once again. Each one of those elements is the size that it needs to be. So Flexbox to me is the better choice. And I probably would also on there put a flex wrap just to be safe, just to prevent any sort of weird stuff going on when we get to smaller sizes, and I don't want any overflow. So I can prevent that just by making sure the wrap is on there. Once again, the rows like this stretches sort of across both of them, but that's what it needs to do without any weird line breaks, and it's going to look normal. I'd probably want to change my alignment on this to make the wrapping look a little bit better, because right now the stretch doesn't really look fantastic. Maybe I'd want those in their own div, and maybe we could do that too. That is my comments. Actually, we can throw a display of flex on that as well. So it's just the chat bubble with the text. That makes sense. And I'd probably actually, oh no, those tags are just floating. I'm sorry about my dog. But yeah, so choosing between Flexbox and Grid for me on those types of things ends up being my main decision is where do I want the control, and do I need to have lots of control, or do I want to let the elements do their own things and just wrap when they need to wrap and other stuff like that. Again, the more complex layouts you have, these questions become more complex as well, but that's sort of the starting point for me. One second. I'll be right back. There we go. She won't bark anymore. All right. I'm just looking at the chat quickly. I'm not going to use tables, Ragnar. Sorry. Natty, if you need images to have the same aspect ratio, the easiest thing to do... Did I do it on this one? I'm not sure if I did. Well, here we can do it. Height, or else to say aspect ratio of 16/9, and then object fit of cover. It will crop them a little bit, but it prevents any sort of weird stretching or anything from going on. What should we use to design responsive email templates? I'm not the right person to ask for email. I saw someone else mentioning email too. Email's not fun. Using absolute, it's only okay to use inside a container with a fixed size and not a fluid one? No, I think you can use absolute with fluid things. It's just you'd want to make sure that it's connected to something that just has regular positioning usually. So if that other thing moves, it's moving along with it. I want to dive in a little bit. Do I have an example? One second. I'm going to see if I can pull up a form. There's a few annoying things with forms that are relatively easy to fix. And then we're not going to look at styling forms. With this one, whoops, no, that's not good. I almost doxed myself there. Okay, one second. I just want to, I have one that we can use. And is this going to fix what I'm doing? ASD. Sorry, this won't take me long. Why is that still popping up though? There we go. Let me just fork that. Okay. And double test. Okay, we won't. There we go. I won't dox myself now. With forms, this is a big issue. When you get forms, it happens a lot where things overflow. Part of the reason that there's issues is just there's these weird stuff with inputs. Inputs are replaced elements, so are images. People are also mentioning that images are hard to make responsive. So the problem with anything when it's a replaced element is just sort of how it does its thing. But inputs actually come in with a minimum size. So you'll often see a min width of 0 can come and like solve some problems at times, where now you can see it's actually shrinking down. Whereas if I don't have that, it's going to stick out and cause some side scrolling, which is really annoying. I'll agree. It was Theo who posted a video saying, should we do this in our CSS to get around that? Because this just seems to come up in like annoying times, and if you don't know about it, it can, it's just annoying. I would actually strongly advise against that. I did a whole video on why, because this causes more problems than it actually solves. But there are times where it can be good to know that like you just need to actually change the minimum width of something, which can seem really, really strange. And this even kicks in if you have, because it has a min width on there, even if you're using like say my form group here, dot form group is a display flex. And we're shrinking, like they're still not going to shrink down, even though they have a flex shrink on them. Let's just, to highlight this, let's also take our label. Let's give it a background of red. And we're going to give it a width of 100 or 200 pixels. So they sort of want to be 200 pixels. Let's put this min width back on. I'm breaking. I would have thought they would have shrunk there. Let me just take out the inputs for a second. I might have something else lower down in the code that's causing an issue here. We'll find out in a second. What did I do? Oh, I have a display grid. That might not be helping situation. That shouldn't be causing an issue. Font size, I'm just looking quickly to see. And my button might also be causing some problems. Let's just see if that does anything. Let's make a new example. Div. We'll just do this one as a section. So my dot example will have an outline of 3 pixels solid blue. And our div will have, let's do 2 divs. Our div will have a width, we'll do padding first. Padding of, no, we'll do a width and a height. Width of 200 pixels again, height of 100 pixels, and a background of purple. No, that's going to look ugly on the blue, light blue. And let's just add a gap here too. So we'll display flex and a gap of 1 rem. So what I wanted to show in that other example was when we get to here, they're actually shrinking down because we have a default, like we don't have any overflow. They're getting smaller than the width I've put here because by default we have a flex shrink of 1. So as soon as you do display flex, the children are allowed to shrink. Unless you have a min width on there, min width of, let's just say 150 pixels. So min width will prevent shrinking from happening. So example will also here get a width of 50% of the viewport, so we'll see them stick out the side better. So here they're shrinking, they're starting to shrink, and then at one point they just stop shrinking because they're not allowed to get smaller than the min width. So in forms, that often happens where you end up with elements that just won't shrink, and it's because there's a min width on them. that's getting in the way. So you just have to throw a min width of 0 on it, and then it will actually shrink down, which can be really annoying. The other thing I would say is, again, with it depends again, but I often find myself using grid for forms because I find they follow pretty strict grids of content anyway. You still want to probably do this min width 0 thing in that case, but just to be careful. Sorry, I'm just trying to read through some of the chat now. I just realized I was being quiet. Happy birthday, early birthday, D Short. It's your birthday tomorrow. So flex basis won't change anything either. Did I close that other example? I didn't. Width and flex basis are literally the same thing if you don't change the flex direction. So it doesn't change anything there. And if I took that off, it's going to work the same way. But the way flex basis works is if you don't put a flex, like the element, if it's a flex item, it has a flex basis on it. If you don't have a declared flex basis, it uses the width to know what it should be, basically. So yeah, flex basis or width. You can use width instead of flex basis. That's fine. You won't see a difference, but if you use width, it'll work. There's again, if you change flex direction, there can be differences between the two. Frozen Toy, mention the gotchas when making even height cards where the content slightly differs. Also flex versus grid when it comes to even heights. It won't really change anything if you're using Flexbox or grid. The main gotcha with content, do I have an example? 1 second. What's this? You can close that. We keep going back to Batman there. CSS Batman. For anyone who missed the beginning of it, I'm going to put that in the chat again. This is from... I lost my YouTube chat. There it is. Alvaro Montoro, who made a CSS framework for making Batman comics. Let me go back to my code pens. Do I have a good example I could use really fast? Oh, I could just even go back. We could talk about something fun in a second, actually. I'm going to leave that page. We'll open this up so I don't forget. Something I did a video on, but I'll talk about this too with Flexbox and Grid, and then maybe we can address. So here's the first thing we'll talk about too. One of the reasons that I like Grid for even just making simple 3-column things is if you're using display flex and one of them has padding on it, we're going to make it bigger. You can't make them the same size. So you could do the same trick as before. Parent is flex 1. So we're selecting all the children. I'm telling them to be the same size, but the middle one is bigger. It's just because the way the Flexbox algorithm works, this is what's going to happen because it's making the content width of them the same. So like the content width of each one of these is equal, and then it's adding the padding on top of that. And people always see that and then say, what about box sizing, border box? That doesn't change anything. Box sizing, border box, and nothing will change because Flexbox doesn't shrink or grow the padding on something. It only deals with the content size of things. So if you're going to have situations like this, one solution is you wrap and your div goes inside of something else here. So it's inside that content. Or instead of having to layer an extra div in there, you just use display grid and grid template columns here instead. Again, this has the disadvantage of having to sort of outline things a little bit. Well, there's other ways of doing it, but and then they should, in this case, I think they're going to be more similar anyway. There's potential for them to be a little bit different. Again, if there's extreme differences, or with the FR as they get really smushed. But actually, I think we could check. Let's see if they're the same. That one's 224.6, 224.6. Yeah, they're all the same. So just really fast there. Why I sort of often like grid more is because if it ever happens where some will have padding and some won't, it's just more the same. Really quickly on this, we could say, let's just say background is light blue. There was the question on like the even height cards, if the content is different. I mean, this is the big gotcha, is often where you run into situations like that, where you end up with lots of empty space in those cards, which can be kind of annoying. Sometimes you have buttons at the ends. We don't have paragraphs or anything set up here. So let's do this one really fast. Let's say we had a dot card, and it has paragraph with lorem, and then it has a button, because I don't want to take any time styling it. And this one in the middle will have more content. Lorem 20. So whether you use grid or flex, they're going to stretch as a default. So you get equal heights cards. And then it's just a question of like, often, how do you get the, let's just say padding. We can change this now. That does nothing because we're, let's say our card, and we don't need the flex one on there. So yeah, you often get things like this where there's like these types of spaced out things. So you could just do display grid. I actually find grids harder to work with in these situations, because you do your equal gap, but then it's like align content of start, I think. Is that going to line them all up? There we go. So you could do something like that. Let's just add some padding here. And then you could say the buttons that are direct children. I'm using nesting here, which is supported in native CSS now. So I'm just saying a button that's in my card that's a direct child has a margin. Actually, I'm not sure if this is going to work. We'll try margin top of auto. Is that even going to work? It won't. And the reason that's not working is because of the way the grids are set up, because I changed the grid of each card. So this is where subgrid technically, I guess, could potentially come in. But you can see there, each grid is different from the other one, which can be a little bit annoying. So if you actually wanted the buttons to line up on the bottom, there's different ways of doing it, but you start playing with it. So maybe that's where you go. Actually, Flexbox would be easier, even though I need to do a flex direction of column. Let's fix that. So they look the same now, but instead of align content start, I could just, I feel like that should work. Maybe I need to give, yeah, so you can see they're actually, they have all the room. So why is it not working? Styles. Oh, my selector wasn't working. We're gonna have to go back to the grid solution in a second here too. Why isn't that working? Okay, whatever. Oh, that's why. Let's see what happens now. There we go. So it pushes them all down. And I don't have to worry about setting up some weird grids to be able to make it happen, to get that to happen. Let's just try that again, grid. That's not gonna do anything. I have padding declared twice, nice. Oh, so I could do it with grid too. Okay, it goes either way there. You can push the content down. I thought it would work, and then I'm like, maybe it won't, but there we go. So sometimes it depends which one you're going to do. And it doesn't really win one way or the other, and it's fine. The flex, I could have done a space between two because I changed the flex direction, you're right. Things that are display flex can be responsive. Fixed can definitely be responsive. Just don't set fixed widths or heights on it, and you're okay. Just be. I see Chris saying you save a bit of typing by using nesting. Just do be careful with it because browser support's not perfect. Sorry, I'm just testing. Huh. What does this do? Oh, sorry, I'm poking around in my chat thing. Cool. So the other thing I did want to talk about was media queries and container queries. And I'm already gone long on time. I thought I'd be done close to now, or actually like 20 minutes ago, but I got sidetracked by some of the questions that came up. My basic thing with media queries is only use them if you have to. So that's not the best example. So for example, like in something like this, if I did want to come in with those 3 columns, right, and I know it has to be 3 columns, like it's 0 or 3 columns, there's actually ways we can get around it now. But I'd probably put that in a media query like we saw before. So at media min width, actually we can do this now. Width is greater than 600 pixels. So much easier. Grid, auto, fit. And if you're going to nesting media queries is also the best. And then just turning things on and off at different sizes is fine. The question I often get is, how do you decide what your media query is? And that's honestly is like right now I find these are actually kind of like you'd be going like, okay, the content's getting too squished, so maybe this should actually be 700. And then I see if it looks better, right? Another option you do have now is we can do calcs in here, which is kind of neat. But that does lead me to this, where I find like media queries, I'll come back to that one in a second. With media queries, again, limiting how many you use is probably a good idea. If you can do it with an intrinsic thing instead of just being like, they're inherently magic numbers. Even if you just follow ones from like, the standards you see out there, just try not to use them unless you just want like a switch of content like this, and then it's fine. It doesn't hurt anybody. Right. But just make sure like this isn't 700 and then something else is at 720 and something else is at 800. Like try and find like a range that works for your layout. You'll find that usually that's what happens. And don't do like 10 different ones if you can avoid it. I've seen, every 200 pixels there's another media query. You probably don't need to do that. So just be a little bit careful. Like don't overdo it if you don't need to be able to do it. With media queries. I did do a video called Smart Layouts with Container Queries, and then there's an article on CSS Tricks now with a very similar name. It's Smart Layouts, I think, something that I wrote. So you can dive. I actually suggest diving into that CSS Tricks. Oh, Amit, I didn't know you did that article for them. Cool. Oh no, I did. Yeah, I've seen an Olympics rings one, but where is it? I'm looking for the one I did. Popular this month. Articles. I guess mine's not popular. There it is. And I'll put it here. And I'll put it here. Just because I'm going to talk more about, or it goes into a lot more depth on why container queries are smarter and stuff. So you can dive in there or watch my video. This also talks about Flexbox use cases, though I didn't talk about Flexbox in my video. But the nice thing with container queries is they can take up different units, basically, whereas media queries, all units are sort of the same thing. So if I change, and so like here, the thing I was talking about before, let's just go to that container. Where did I set it up? Oh, the full width here. Let's just make this like 85 instead, so we can get a bit wider. And so what I could do here, if I did this as I need, sorry, the one thing grid auto fit. Yeah, so my grid auto fit here, you do need to define containers. So container type is inline size. And then instead of a media query, I can say at container query, and it works exactly the same way. And that should, what did I do wrong? Container. If anyone can tell me what I did wrong, I would appreciate it. Because obviously I'm doing something wrong. Time to debug. It is a container. You can see that it gets the container thing here, which is useful. So the grid auto fit is a container. Oh, I know what I did wrong. Oh, you can't. I have the container here. Whoops. Okay. So, right. I don't want, this is the problem with containers, actually, is it always has to be the parent that has it, not the element itself. So sometimes you do end up wrapping in an extra thing. I'm going to do it on the body now. I don't think it's the best practice to have your body be a container, but we're going to do it now. Body, container type, inline size. And now, there we go. It's working. The advantage that you can do is you can put different units here. So I could actually say something, and you can put different units in a media query. It just doesn't have the same impact as with a container query. You can watch my video or that article to find out why. So here we can say width is actually, and we were saying before it was about 25 ch, and I can say times 3, and just wrap that all in a calc. And so it's going to go up to 3 columns once I have room for them to be 25 ch wide. And if you wanted to be more precise, you could take the gap into account and stuff like that too. But I love doing stuff like this now that I've discovered that you can do it. There was Miriam Suzanne who let me know you can put calcs, and the calcs do work in media queries as well. The advantage of it being in a container query is, again, if the container is looking at the body right now, but if I placed it somewhere else, it would still work there based on how wide it was and not the viewport. They're so much nicer. So a question, what's the inline size? So it's just saying that the containers, I'm defining the body as a container, which again, I don't think is best practice. Not sure though. And it's looking at the inline size. So inline axis is left to right. So it's looking at the width of the element basically. Alejandro, thanks for, if you have any questions, I was going to do a members only Q&A at the end. We're sort of tight on time, but I don't know how many people are here that are members. So if anybody has questions, this would be the time for it. I'll do a more general Q&A in a minute or two, but if any members or patrons have questions, if you guys leave them, I'll prioritize yours over other people's. So drop them in if you have any, because we're just wrapping up now anyway. But yeah, we're going to be, so yeah, doing container query stuff like this, I find really good. Just to show you actually, let's just say we came in here and I had another element, half width. I don't know why we'd have this, but we're going to copy this same thing. My grid auto fit is going to go in there. We need all of that. I'm going to put it here. And let's just come right here. We're going to say half width is width 50%. Let's give it an outline too, just so we can see it. Solid red. So we're breaking a little bit here because it's still too narrow, but you can see here, these are actually stacking on each other. And over here, oh, we need to define our container. Half width is also going to be a container type of inline size. So these ones are next to one another, whereas over here, they're still stacked this way because they don't have that 25 ch of room to get turned into columns, whereas here, these ones did. So that's the big reason container queries are better than media queries, because I could just make that a media query, and then they squish down and it looks terrible, and these ones do that because it's looking at the viewport size, and looking at the viewport size isn't really the best way to work in most cases. So containers, the annoying thing with containers is you have to define a container, and the container can't look at itself for its own size, so it starts getting in the way a little bit, or you end up with an extra layer of wrapping around stuff sometimes. But yeah, you have to be a little bit careful there. I see Mohammed asking, can we set container queries for height? So you have two choices. A container type can either be inline size or just size. Notice how when I do size, it broke my layout though. For container queries to work, they need to be able for container queries to work and not crash the browser. They have to ensure that there's no way that they can cause loops that would break the browser. And because the width of an element, like we saw at the very beginning, the width of an element is as wide as it wants to be. And if you're going to change the width of an element, you're declaring something on that element to make it smaller. The browser knows how wide things are. The element is deciding that, basically. The height of an element is defined by its children. The children have no impact on the width of an element. They have an impact on the height of an element. And because of that, if we want a container query that looks at the height of an element, you do a container type size, but then it means the children have no impact on the height of that element anymore. So it effectively has a height of 0, and all the content will overflow out of it. So the only way you can have a container type that's looking at size, which you definitely can do instead of width, you can have that set up for height, but you need something here that's going to have a defined height on it. And if you did it with a solid value, like 1,000 pixels, it's kind of useless, obviously. But you'd have to have something. You can see it's still overflowing here. But you need something to do it. So doing it for heights is possible, but it's a lot more limited and in how it works, just so we don't cause any major issues with the browser. Excuse me. Photech, is any of this covered in the stuff I'm talking about now? No, is not covered. I am planning on updating Conquering Responsive Layouts once I finish Beyond CSS, which is a few weeks away from being ready. So the next thing actually is going to be, this is a rough draft of some of the things I'm going to be putting into there. Shaggy, I will see if you have any questions, not spamming them, because that's not going to get them answered. Ragnar, I have a Flexbox course. I don't have a grid course, even though I use grid more than Flexbox, so it's kind of ironic, I guess. But I plan on doing just a layouts course to cover both of them, because I think it makes sense for both to be covered in one course. Steel Toad, watching this feels like the before and after of so many CSS mistakes. So Shaggy, how we met the left side of the container, but the image on the right side. So I'll point you to another video of mine, actually, because I don't have the time, but I'll show you what I created. Oh, it's probably in my collections. CSS Day. Is it not in here? Last button. Sorry, just give me 1 second. Single grid. Content grid. Simple. I don't think it's that one. Is it my simple one? No, it's not that one. Did I not include it in this one? Huh, I thought I included it there. 1 second. So you can definitely, there's different ways of doing this as well. I've done a few different things on it. I'm scared if I look at breakout, it's not going to find the right one. Okay, maybe this one or this one. So this is building on top of what I'd shared in earlier with the grid setup, but you can see it's a very complicated grid. This one actually, I got like the slider that can line up with the edges of the content, which is kind of cool. You can do narrow content, regular content, wider content, and did I do the images in this one? Full width. Yeah, there we go. So you can get like things that go all the way to the side, including images and not the content. I had fixed that, but this isn't the example where it's fixed, obviously. So I'm actually using grid for all of this, and I added the split. The split down the middle actually here is using subgrid. So that is one limitation of this. But basically, the parent here has a grid on it. Can I, whoops, I just want to do that. There we go. So I have this grid on here that all the children are living on, and then I just say where I want it to line up to. And then I'll put the link to this code pen if you want to dive in. It is kind of weird and kind of complex. There's easier ways of doing just this type of layout if that's all you need, but I find most of the time people need more than just that. For this one, I do use named lines, yes. Creating this thing that I have here convinced me that named lines are the best. And I wish I'd realized it earlier on. I don't know if this could actually be easier to read if I use the grid shorthand, because this is just the template columns. Karen's asking, how will we use the grid template columns repeat auto fit and have them be different sizes? You can't do that. That's not how that one works. If you want defined, yeah, you can't. If you're using the repeat syntax, it means every column is always going to be the same size. Yeah, there's ways of like sort of cheating it a little bit. Like here, I'm doing this one with Flexbox actually, with container queries, but you can have it where you can do the same type of behavior with grid, and change an element with a container query so it's taking up like 3 of the like a different number of columns or something like that, if that makes sense. But yeah, there's no way with the repeat syntax not to have equal columns. Florian, you have a page with 3 boxes in a grid, which divides the page into 4 equal parts. The bottom row goes over the full width. Okay. Just before I get to the second part there, Mohammed's asking if we do masonry effect using grid. Not yet. They're working on it. In all the boxes, there's a heading, a list, and now you want to make the list scrollable if there's too much content in it, but I only get the whole page to scroll. One second. Sorry, I'm looking at like 3 different. One sec. Okay, I'm just going to jump back to. I mean, sorry, going back to this example really fast for Shaggy. Like right now, I have it going all the way to the edge. I could stop this at any of these lines here that I wanted to, if I don't want it to grow infinitely. It really depends on the use case a little bit. And again, this isn't the only way to do that. The question, so scroll bar stuff can get kind of weird. If I understand correctly, let's just say we have body, div times 4. Then we have body is display grid template columns repeat 3 1fr. So we get 3 columns. Min height 100. We'll do a DVH this time. And then let's add a gap just so we can see these. Gap of 1 rem. And then those divs will get a background of light blue. So the last one there, so we can say div last child is grid column 1 over -1. And then we want one of these to be able, Ruben, yes, it'll be, the replay will be up after. So if there's a bunch of content, so let's just say lorem 100, is that enough? Lorem 100. So instead of getting taller, So we could say grid template rows. Let's start with that and say 1FR, 1FR. Is that going to work? It might not because we have content in one of them. So I could actually say 50%. And then that's causing overflow. I wouldn't do, if ever you do this, if you use percentages in grid, don't add them up to 100 if you have gaps. It's going to cause problems. Sort of like when we saw earlier with the Flexbox when we were doing a wrap with the flex units. So I'm just saying the first one is 50% tall and letting the other one fill up the available space because it's doing that on its own already. And then overflow. Overflow. If we did that, would it work? It's annoying because they all get it though, right? Oh, I guess we could do auto. There we go. And then if this has a margin of 0, I think we have no scrolling. There we go. Wasn't sure if that was going to work, but that was fun. I don't know if that's exactly the use case you wanted, but hopefully that at least pushes you in the right direction. And oh, that's okay. I don't think I can use, like if I did 1FR here, I don't think it's going to work because it's going to grow because of that one. So just doing a 50% and not declaring the other one seems to be the better solution, I think. But yeah, I think we're going to wrap things up there. If anybody has any questions or other things, I'm probably going to do another one in a month. Maybe I'll just talk about container queries and media queries a little bit more in that one because I sort of rushed through at the end there, but I'm going a little bit long. So any news about overflow clip margin? I haven't been following it too closely. So no, it is cool, but I don't know where it stands right now. Do a live conversation for the BEM methodology in the future. I could talk about it, or I could do one on just like naming conventions in general, just because I've moved away from BEM. So I could talk about why I liked it, why I still think it's all right, but where I've gone to as well and why. That could be interesting. I don't see too much chat going on. So again, I'll wait a couple minutes to see if any last questions come in. But I won't stick around for too long. Which window is that? Is that this one? I have a little window showing up next to my head there, and I'm not sure what's causing it, but that's okay. Oh, people seem to have enjoyed it, so thank you. I'm glad that you did. I won't be doing any Tailwind videos, I'm sorry. Adrian, I have talked about masonry, but the spec that I looked at still hasn't been implemented. So yeah. Johan B, any recommendations on where to start learning CSS? If you're at like day one, you haven't really started at all, I do have a beginner playlist. It is old, but most of it is still very, very relevant. So that's on my YouTube channel. I'm trying to think of other if you don't mind paid courses, Jeff Graham just put out an intro to HTML and CSS course. So if you just look up, I don't know, can I find it? I think I just found it. Thebasics.dev. Jeff is the editor at CSS Tricks, as well as somebody who's helped me with my own videos, and I've worked with quite a bit in the past. So I highly recommend everything he does. He knows his stuff really well. He also teaches at university and other stuff. What else is there? There's even the Google Web Devs learning resources and stuff. They have, I'm not going to, Google's one, if you look it up, it was written, the people who put it together are all super smart, highly respected CSS people that I would recommend to, and it's free. So that's a nice little bonus. How can we manage a logo slider by CSS with slide animation without using JS? You'd need to duplicate everything, I think, to be able to make it work properly. So that's kind of annoying. But other than that, as long as you have everything twice, it would have a chance to sort of look like it's an infinite slider. Misanthropic. I very much enjoyed this. Helped me realize I got more to learn about flexing grid. There's a lot. Keep it really simple with both of them, though, is always my suggestion. Like, what's the easy? When you don't know them super well, it can be hard to know like which one would be easier for this or that. And again, there is some overlap between them. But just like, if you find yourself having to force something to work, then sometimes like, maybe I'll try the other one instead and see if I can get it to work there. Army, what do I think about Tailwind? It's stupid, or it's not for me, but I get why people like it. Yassine, can I make a video about how much JavaScript is enough to start React? Just don't bother with React. No, I think you probably don't need tons, and I mean, I know a lot of people that are very good developers that started learning React before they started learning JavaScript because that's what they were told to do. I learned jQuery before I learned JavaScript. It happens. It's maybe not the best way, but people get there and it can work. I would say the thing, if you know enough JavaScript, so when you're looking at React, you know what's React and you know what's JavaScript. And then as you continue to learn it, you can still make that distinction. I think you probably know enough. The good golly, my BEM video, yeah, 5 years ago. Wow. I mean, what I mentioned in it, it's still relevant to how it works. I don't use it anymore, but I'm still heavily influenced by how BEM works. I think the video is still good, yeah. And Muhammad, I talked a lot about that today already. So you can watch the replay afterwards on how to pick between the two of them. So yeah, thank you guys all for coming and hanging out with me. I'm going to get going now. Why is Tailwind not for me? I like writing CSS, and I find it's harder for me to read, which drives me nuts. I don't get I don't work. I find it trying to think of the politically correct way to answer this. My main complaint about Tailwind is it encourages an over componentization of things, which you see with Catalyst and some other things that they've done, where everything just becomes a component. Like your list item is a component, and it's like, well, we have a list item. Like you can just make a class or just style your list item. And it's just like, I do think the end game for like having Tailwind work properly is literally to componentize everything, and then it just sort of at one point becomes like, well, at that, like, is it really beneficial when you've gone down that much of a rabbit hole? Instead of like, why not? You're almost reinventing the wheel at one point. So yeah, but I do get why people like it. All right. Alrighty, I'm gonna get going. I think we started to chat on Tailwind and everything else, but yeah, you got my points on it there. But yeah, thank you all for coming and hanging out. And with that, I'm gonna let you all go. Have yourselves all a fantastic weekend, and I'll see you. I'll be back next week with regular scheduled content, and then we're gonna be probably doing a video on the problems with AI and CSS and how it's not as helpful as I wish it was. And then I'll probably do another live stream in 1 or 2 months from now. We'll figure out what it'll be, but probably more responsive stuff because I didn't get everything I wanted it to be. All right. Awesome. Yeah. Thank you all for hanging out, and have a great weekend. Bye, everybody. Wait, I'm still not in streamer mode. I have to add this to my... No, it's not that one. It's not that one. It's this one. There we go. Bye, everyone. Oh, and we only got the Twitch chat showing up on screen. Sorry about that. Bye, everyone.